All right, let's jump straight into this explainer and unravel the really fascinating reality of global sustainability. Now, when most of us talk about going green, we usually just picture our local recycling bins at the end of the driveway, right? But the truth is way more complex, and frankly, a lot more interesting than just tossing a plastic bottle into a blue bin. Today, we're digging into some incredible findings from a recent Chatham House research paper to see how international trade actually acts as the invisible engine running the entire global circular economy. So think about this for a second. When you upgrade and recycle your old phone, where does it actually go? What's so wild about this question is that it completely shatters our local backyard view of recycling. You might drop that phone off at a neighborhood tech drive, but you are instantly plugging into a massive $294 billion international web of traded materials. Let's map out exactly how that web works.
We've got a lot of ground to cover today. We'll start with Part 1, Beyond the Recycling Bin. Then Part 2, the 5 circular flows. Part 3 explores the right to repair. Part 4 looks at the global waste shadow. And finally, Part 5, closing the global loop.
Okay, kicking things off with Section 1, Beyond the Recycling Bin. Right now, globally, we are stuck in this linear take, make, waste trap. And you really have to wrap your head around the scale of this. Of the 100 billion tons of resources we consume every single year, over 90% are eventually just discarded, tossed into landfills or incinerated. To escape that, we absolutely have to embrace an inclusive circular model. It's all about decoupling our economic growth from, well, environmental destruction. We do this by slowing down resource use, narrowing the flows, creating loops, and regenerating natural systems. We've got to make sure we're doing it with social justice in mind, too.
But because the scale is just so massive, a circular economy simply can't exist in a bubble. You literally cannot achieve it country by country. International trade has to be the central nervous system here, connecting the supply of used goods, raw materials, and new tech across borders. This is what's known as circular trade.
Moving right along to Section 2, the 5 circular flows. So these 5 interconnected pillars, they are the absolute foundation of circular trade. And we're talking about a really diverse range of transactions here. It's the whole shebang. It includes everything from the digital tracking software and the intellectual property you need to run a recycling plant, all the way down to the physical shipments of used products, remanufactured parts, secondary raw materials, and even the waste and scrap that's destined for recovery.
If we zoom in on that second flow, used goods, we can see some genuinely amazing benefits. Take this example. It's fascinating. Japan has really strict domestic environmental regulations, which makes scrapping their old trains incredibly expensive. So instead of scrapping them, they export these used, super high-quality air-conditioned rail cars to places like Jakarta, Indonesia. Jakarta gets this much-needed public transit infrastructure for about 1/10 the cost of buying brand-new trains. It is a total win-win for the circular economy.
Now, that being said, trading used goods isn't always sunshine and rainbows. Sometimes it can actually lock developing countries into heavily polluting vehicle fleets, considering about 70% of used vehicles exported globally go to developing nations. Look at this direct policy comparison. Uganda has 0 age limits on importing used cars, but right next door, Kenya enforces a strict 8-year age limit. Because Kenya put that regulation in place, they're protecting their environment way better. Meanwhile, Uganda and other places without those limits are dealing with average fuel consumption and CO2 emissions that are roughly a quarter higher than in Kenya. And you've got to see the sheer scale of the secondary raw materials flow. The worker here, inspecting the scrap metal, represents an absolutely massive industry. Get this, in 2020 alone, the global metal waste and scrap trade hit $119 billion. This trade takes materials and aggregates them wherever demand is highest around the world. It maximizes economies of scale, meaning we don't always have to tear up the earth to mine for fresh ore.
Let's dive into Section 3, the right to repair.
Okay, here is where things get really complicated. For a circular economy to actually work, you need third-party workers all over the globe to be able to repair, remanufacture, and safely recycle products. But when original manufacturers aggressively lock down their intellectual property, it creates a massive bottleneck. For instance, BMW actually restricts access to the patented tools you need to recycle their used cars, including the highly specific tech required just to drain the oil from the shock absorbers. When local third-party workers in other countries are locked out of those repair manuals and specialized tools, those valuable goods are way more likely to just end up as toxic waste.
To fight back against this exact kind of IP hoarding, the European Union is currently pushing some sweeping legislation. They're rolling out digital products passports.
This basically forces companies to be totally transparent, sharing data about a product's life cycle, its durability, and how to repair it. They are quite literally legally mandating the right to repair, so that original manufacturers can't just hoard specialized information at the expense of global sustainability.
All right, moving into the darker side of things with Section 4, the global waste shadow.
The volatility of this trade is honestly pretty shocking when international policies shift. Up until 2017, China was importing almost half of all the globally traded plastic waste. But then they rolled out the National Sword Initiative and strictly banned the import of several types of waste. The ripple effect was basically instantaneous. It effectively chopped the global trade of plastic waste in half in just 4 years, dropping from 15 million tons in 2016 down to 7.3 million tons in 2020. Exporters suddenly had literally nowhere to send their plastic, which led to a ton of emergency stockpiling and incineration. And because domestic waste disposal is so expensive, the terrifying reality is that high-income countries sometimes exploit legal loopholes to dump hazardous waste onto less developed nations. Criminals will flat out lie on customs declarations. Take this crazy scandal, for example. A shipment arrived in Sri Lanka from the UK that was supposed to just be used carpets and mattresses. But actually, it was packed with illegal, incredibly hazardous hospital biowaste, literally including human body parts from morgues. It took 2 full years of international disputes just to force them to send that shipment back to the UK.
So the takeaway here is that illegal waste trafficking isn't just some niche environmental hazard. No, it's a highly sophisticated, massively lucrative global shadow economy. Criminals dodge compliance costs by forging documents and hiding toxic waste inside normal recycling shipments. According to the Financial Action Task Force, environmental crimes, which are largely driven by this waste trafficking, generate up to $281 billion in dirty money every single year.
And honestly, nowhere is the human cost of this trade more visible than right here in this staggering statistic, 90%. That is the amount of the world's end-of-life shipping tonnage that gets scrapped and dismantled in South Asia. Now, old ships are essentially massive piles of hazardous waste. They are loaded with asbestos, lead, mercury, yet they are constantly being dismantled by informal, really low-paid migrant workers who usually don't even have basic protective equipment. They suffer tragic health consequences just to recover the secondary steel.
Which brings us to our final section, closing the global loop. So much of this chaos comes down to one core problem, a fundamental regulatory mismatch. Right now, customs agents simply can't police circular trade effectively because our global tracking codes literally don't speak the same language. The Globally Used Harmonized System, or HS codes, they only look at a product's physical characteristics. They can't tell the difference between a brand new laptop, a used laptop that needs a repair, or a completely shattered laptop meant for scrap. Meanwhile, you have the Basel Convention, which handles hazardous waste, and that focuses entirely on the intention to discard the item. You've got 2 completely different frameworks, which makes it way too easy for bad actors to slip hazardous waste right through the cracks.
If we want to actually fix this, the global community needs a coordinated response. The research points to 3 clear steps. Step 1, we have to develop a shared global language and unified codes so customs agents know exactly what they're looking at. Step 2, we need to lower the tariffs and technical barriers on goods that enable the circular economy, making repairing and remanufacturing cheaper than just mining for new materials. And Step 3, we absolutely must embed inclusivity into all our trade agreements. Developing nations need capacity-building support so they can participate safely, rather than just being used as the world's dumping ground.
Which leaves us with this final thought. The next time you look at the phone in your hand, the clothes in your closet, or the car in your driveway, things you will inevitably discard one day, ask yourself this question. The stuff we consume is tied to an incredibly vast, super intricate global web. And whether that web ultimately builds a sustainable future for us all or just keeps perpetuating harm entirely depends on how we choose to trace, regulate, and fairly manage the global flows of circular trade.